Hi there, 3254. This is Dr. Ang coming to deliver our PowerPoint on ethics and ethical concerns. And what basically is ethics? When you think of ethics, what do you think of? Typically, what comes to mind, it's your moral reasoning or your moral perspectives that guide your thoughts, feelings, and actions. So what we think and feel and our inner being of who we are comprises our moral perspectives that then guide typically our actions, and it's the lenses through which we see the world. So if you go to the first slide and pull up our PowerPoint on Harvey, the first slide is just an example. When life begins. So when do you feel life begins? This is a topic that some argue is very definitive in their minds, but then other argues there's not really a right or wrong answer. And we realize that there's a very broad spectrum of responses that are generated from people that are seeing life through their specific ethical lenses and their moral perspectives. So this particular slide says at the moment of conception. That can be one perspective. The other, some people believe at birth. And then just as an outlier, just to throw it in there, it's the teenager saying when you get your driver's license. It's just a little cartoon just to give you the idea and a little taste of ethics that it's all in the mind of the beholder as far as how you're going to approach certain concepts. Some concepts that we will discuss within ethics and within ethical framework are very touchy, very sensitive for some people, while others are not. Some have a higher investment for people. Some will be more, have a political stance, a religious stance. Some, it may be, this is the way I've always been raised. Others, it's through life experiences. That's why I feel strongly or passionately about this, and why I think and feel the way that I do. But regardless, all of these come together to form, everyone will have their individual moral compass and moral principles that will guide their actions. And that this all helps comprise our ethical framework. So our class learning outcomes are, we're going to examine the purpose and composition of ethical committees. We're going to discuss the nature of human rights and the right to life argument. We're going to demonstrate an understanding of ethical dilemmas related to genetic science versus and stem cell research. Explore additional ethical dilemmas of stem cell research and treatment. These are a hot topic, and they have been a hot topic for many years. And you can also see, regardless of who is in as president, who's in administrative offices, whether it be at the national level or it be at the state level or even local level, you can see the influence that individual or that party may have on certain things. So I have touched on that as we go through the slides as well. So I have a slide here, suggested readings. You want to read this in the text, you can review that. More importantly, I would probably guide you a little bit more towards the references, because I have some really cool videos that give perspective into certain aspects. And I want you to look at these just with an open mind, and I'm not trying to sway you. I have very, very specific thoughts and feelings myself, and my moral perspective is very set, and I do like to hear thoughts and feelings of others, and I generally I have a very genuine respect for those thoughts and feelings, but I know where I stand. I'm not in any way trying to sway you on any of these topics. And when we are in class and this is the course, and you can see it in Harvey, we bring donuts in, you bring a coffee, tea, whatever it is, your beverage of choice, and we sit and we just discuss. And it's interesting in a very rich conversation to hear the perspectives that different people from different parts of the country or the world may share or bring to the table. Different people that are of different age groups and life experiences bringing all that together brings for some very rich conversations that we do in a mutual, where we share respect, and we have a very, just create a culture of respect and offering dignity to everyone involved. And there is no comment that is inappropriate for the most part, because we like to run these thoughts and feelings by, and respecting the perspectives and experiences that others bring to the table. So, reviewing ethical dilemma. It's a situation in which there is a choice to be made between two alternatives. And depending on the individual, you can argue A or B could be correct. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, depending on what political party you may be from, or which religion you may be from, or the way that you were brought up may lean you to one perspective or the other. But oftentimes there is not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but it's a situation when you're forced maybe to choose. Both alternatives are equally ethically justifiable and may involve conflicting duties, rights, or principles. One thing I like to bring out in class is you must first know your personal ethical philosophy before you can then merge a professional ethical philosophy. Because when you peel back the onion of your personal ethical beliefs and your moral compass, you will see that you may have a perspective that does not align well with some professional roles. So that would not be, when I'm kind of guiding students into a long-term what position that they want to work in as a nurse, I always ask them to kind of feel that out. And certain aspects are going to be uncomfortable for you maybe, or you don't want to go to work each day and be forced to do something or function in a role that is contrary to your personal moral compass and your personal ethical principles that you guide and make decisions by. So choosing something that aligns more closely to that may feel a little more comfortable, because just knowing there are often times when there's conflicting duties or rights or responsibilities associated with some professional roles. So we kind of dive into that. Ethical theories. We want to get a little framework and foundation built for ethics here. Deontology is based on duty. So the ethical theory of deontology, you want to know, is based on duty. Very matter of fact. Utilitarianism is based on consequences, or more or less, if in the end it works out, the end will justify the means, or the greater good. If it potentially can help all these people, it really doesn't matter if we cross a few lines now or sacrifice one for the betterment of the group. And then virtue ethics. This is the one I was mentioning. Also, I encourage you to maybe stop this PowerPoint or stop this video and just jot down a few things. What are some of the virtues that are very, very near and dear to you and would make you feel very uncomfortable if you were forced away from those and into a position that contradicted those virtues? So if honesty is something that's very important to you, whichever those virtues may be, you want to make sure that you're functioning in a role that is not compromised. So virtue ethics based on an innate character traits. So who you are as a person, when you peel back everything else, who you are deep inside, contributed to those ethical lenses through which you see the world as a person. Also, you're going to want those to align in a professional role. So just being mindful of that. So a little deeper dive into deontology. It's based on duty, rules, and norms. This is something that will be more policies and procedures. I do this because that's what the policy says to do. I work for this hospital. In this case, they tell me to do this. Therefore, I follow steps according to the policy A, B, C, and D. And that's the way that I approach the decision makings. I don't necessarily think in a framework where I think for myself, I follow policies and procedures, duties, rules, and norms. And generalized, it's pretty much same for all situations. There's not a lot of case-by-case scenarios, and it's very cut and dry on those decisions. So when you think policies and procedures, when you think duties, rules, and norms, by the book, that and one size fits all, that's going to be deontology perspective, ethical perspective. Utilitarianism, it's based on the consequences, as I've mentioned. The end justifies the means. Greatest good for the greatest number of people. Nothing is inherently right or wrong if you can justify that in the end it'll be okay. So if you're Robin Hood, you're stealing from the rich to give to the poor, or whatever your this would be. And a good example of this is going to be when it comes to maybe stem cell research. I can justify, I know there's some controversy about embryonic stem cell research, but if it potentially could create and spur the cure for a disease, then wouldn't it be worth it? So trying is going to be worth the effort, and we can overlook that this may be controversial because of the potential of a cure. So that's in a sense of we're looking for the greatest good for the greatest number. We're looking for as long as the end justifies the means, then we're okay. And nothing is really right or wrong. You can, as long as you can somewhat justify what you're doing based on the consequences in the end, as long as it turns out okay. That's the utilitarianism ethical perspective. Can rules change depending on the circumstances? So whereas deontological perspective, it's always the same, rules and norms, and it doesn't change. Unlike deontology, the opposite would be utilitarianism, where rules do change. Depending on the circumstance, the rules will change. And the problem, individual rights may be sacrificed for the overall good. And that is the ethical dilemma that is controversial with this perspective. With this ethical perspective is it okay to compromise and sacrifice the rights of one if you think that in the end it may help, there's the potential to help a greater number. This may hurt a few in the process, but it potentially could help hundreds or thousands of people. That is the dilemma with utilitarianism. So virtue ethics, again, based on innate character traits that are considered to be moral virtues. The premise for virtue ethics is basically good people do good things. And some of the virtues that I was mentioning would be courage, justice, faith, charity, caring, integrity. If, let's see, you may be in a situation where you're put in a difficult situation where integrity is not valued. And that would be very, very difficult for you to function in that role if honesty and integrity are compromised. If you're in a role where you have a lot of empathy and caring and compassion, but you're in a role where you have to make some very, very hard decisions and deny care from certain people because there may be, such as when the pandemic, and some people had to be turned away because we just cannot help everyone. And that would put you in a very, very difficult position if you were in that. Trustworthiness, temperance, discernment, generosity, hope. All of these are virtue ethics. And here's where I encourage you, if you didn't before, just take a couple minutes and write down some of those virtues, maybe 3 of them that are very, very important to you and who you are. And when you jot those down and you know these are very critical and they're what makes up my lenses through which I see the world, it will help you to go through and say, when I make decisions, I look at it through the lenses of my integrity, regardless, no matter what I'm asked to do in a professional role, no matter what the ethical dilemma is, I know my integrity will always be at stake. Honesty, I will always be honest and reliable, trustworthy, whatever those are. Some will probably rise a little bit higher. They may all sound important to you, but ones that will, you will be unwavering if you're faced with an ethical dilemma. Again, virtue ethics. Ethics are based on premise or moral norms from which rules are developed. Values and principles are concepts that are valued by society, often underlie ethical dilemmas. And virtues and principles are considered moral absolutes. And respect for persons is the major principle that is the foundation for all the rest. So that's the key, and I've underlined it on this slide. Respect for persons, for other people. Respect for people is the major principle that is the foundation for everything else in virtue ethics. So, nursing and ethics, some primary values from the Code of Ethics. If you pull up the OBN website, you can see where we have the Code of Ethics, and I encourage you to look under here. And again, it's on the left-hand side. Just scroll down on the column, and you'll be able to pull that up. But providing a safe, compassionate, competent, and ethical care. Just going to name a few of these. Promoting health and well-being, promoting and respecting informed decision-making, preserving dignity, maintaining privacy and confidentiality, promoting justice, and being accountable. These are just a few of the nursing ethics that are found in our nursing Code of Ethics. You can pull up the link there. I have that as well. Provisions of the Code of Ethics for nurses and imperative statements. You can see them listed here. I'm not going to read all those to you, but I do encourage you to look at these, because our Code of Ethics, just as we mentioned on the legal aspects, we are required and responsible in our profession as nurses to be aware of the legal ramifications and our standard of care that is set for our profession as nurses. Similarly, we also have a Code of Ethics that guides our ethical functioning as a nurse. So we must fall within the Code of Ethics to be functioning within our role and to avoid pitfalls that would end us with a tort, to land us in court with something. So we must adhere to Code of Ethics. This is not a feel-good suggestion. This is imperative in our professional role, that we are not only aware of the Code of Ethics, but that we function within our role along with respect to the Code of Ethics. So, for example, the nurse practices with compassion and respect for the inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person. These are things that we generally would know to do, but in our day-to-day, when we get tired, when we have a heavy workload, when we're overworked, there's a staffing shortage, we have so many things going on. Are we taking time to do these things? The nurse's primary commitment is to the patient, whether it's an individual, family, group, community, population. We are not there for ourselves. We are there for our patients. Once we say once we have someone that enters in and there's a duty owed to that patient is our priority, and we are to advocate for them and their family. The nurse promotes, advocates for, and protects the rights, health, and safety of the patient. This comes into maleficence, non-maleficence, beneficence, all the things of doing good, avoiding harm to our patients, and all the things that we do with these principles in order to advocate for the optimal outcomes for our patient. The nurse has authority, accountability, and responsibility for nursing practice, making decisions and taking actions consistent to the obligation to promote health and provide optimal care. It's one that I kind of just alluded to. The nurse owes the same duties to self and to others, including the responsibility to promote health, safety, and preserve wholeness of character, integrity, maintain competence. This is one that, although we are a nurse, we're maybe a new nurse, and once you get 5 years in, 10 years in, you are always maintaining a certain level of competency so that you deliver an optimal level of care, regardless of what role you're in, how long you have been a nurse. You're going to maintain a certain level of standard of care functioning. That's an ethical principle, is I'm going to bring my A game every time I play the game. So that's going to be your motto. You're always going to bring your A game. So I'm going to let you go through the rest of these provisions. There are 9 of them there. You can look through those. It's good to read those. And again, when you're going to work for an institution, if it's one of the 3 big hospitals, whatever the case may be, you're going to want to find out if there are amendments made to the provisions, to the code of ethics, to the standards of care for nurses. How are we made aware of those? Will your director of nursing make sure that you're aware of those, or do they kind of help give you updates or communicate that with you? And obviously you are ultimately responsible as a nurse to be aware of those changes and then to function and make changes accordingly. But also it's good, if you are working for one of these, to find out how do they help make sure that you remain competent in these areas. Okay, so ethics committees. The purpose is to protect rights of humans. So there are ethics committees inside of hospitals. Most organizations are going to have ethics committees. And the function, obviously the main purpose is to protect the rights of humans. Functions of these ethical committees are to provide ethics consultation in difficult or unusual situations. There are always going to be those days that seem like, wow, I didn't see that coming. And you'll look back and think, did I do the right thing? Did I do the best thing? And you may second guess yourself. There are those smaller decisions. And then there are going to be some that creep up that are like, this is really tough. And I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. I can think of, as of recently, providing care for a child. And you're getting input, very strong input from a foster parent, and then you have biological parent that's trying to speak into it, and you have the child technically is in custody of DHS, yet the child is wanting the biological parent, and you're stuck in the middle. There are things like that. There are things when it comes to there was poor communication and results did not end up optimal for the patient, and you're not sure exactly how this all should unfold and what this looks like for the patient and family and staff that were involved. Ethical committees can help kind of peel those back, and then in turn obviously help to make sure that they can do the best they can in this situation for the patient and family, but then to step back and say, how can we learn from this? In the future, what can we do to avoid situations like this? Ethical committees also develop and revise select hospital policies pertaining to clinical ethics. So when there is an issue, there is a concern, maybe we need to revise the policies and procedures surrounding this dilemma. Facilitate education about topical issues and clinical ethics. Members of hospital committees represent major clinical services. Ethical committees are going to be made of physicians, maybe PAs, nurses, physical therapists, respiratory therapists. It can have management staff, business staff, lawyers, all. In other words, it's not just healthcare staff as far as like doctors and nurses. We want to get as many people as you can, because that's going to bring, what does that bring? Perspective. Perspective from a lot of different ethical principles are going to come in and say, yeah, but let me give you the angle from nursing. Let me give you the angle from physicians. And then a lawyer will speak into, this is how I see it. And it's a way to kind of filter through and sift through ethical dilemmas, and then to learn and recreate policies and procedures to help ensure the best outcomes in these situations. Okay, so when it comes to research ethics committees, biomedical research does not establish guidelines, but they ensure that they are followed. International guidelines are established to protect the rights, safety, and well-being of research participants. Anytime there's a research question that a possible option of an answer says anything to be protect the rights of the participants, that's probably it. So well-being of research participants and to ensure the results of the investigations are credible. The cardinal principle is respect and dignity for all persons. This is the overall goals of ethics committees. And then the principle of justice. Benefits and burdens of research should be distributed fairly among all groups and classes in society. So when we're doing research, we want to generalize to as many groups as we can. We also don't want to sacrifice any one age group, one condition, one diagnosis, one whether it's one class of people, anything like that. We're wanting to respect the dignity of all involved, all participants, and it would be equally spread among all groups. So if you've heard of IRB, when you come to do research, the IRB, it mandated by the Research Act in 1974. So 1974, IRBs came into play. They were mandated by the Code of Federal Regulations, and functions are review biomedical and behavioral research involving human subjects. Why is this important? We don't want to do research just for the sake of doing research and then sacrificing certain people in order to do that. So even in the utilitarianism ethical perspective, where, well, we can do this to this group of people or this class of people or this age group, because that really doesn't matter, because in the end, it may benefit. And we want to be very careful. So who decides that? You can't just have people for the sake of researchers conducting any research that they deem appropriate at the expense of individuals and human life. Therefore, the IRB was formed where we could have mandated and we can have regulation along this process. And again, that's in 1974 by the Code of Federal Regulations. So IRBs have the authority to approve. This is a very important part of this slide. IRBs have the authority to approve, disapprove, require modifications, or to terminate research studies. That's the gist of what IRB does. Approve, disapprove, require modifications, or to terminate research studies. And then to monitor ongoing research. They also want to make sure that participation for human participants is informed and voluntary. So you're never told that you have to participate or coerced. It's voluntary, and then you are very informed of the process. So the next slide, and I'm going to tell you right now that it is somewhat troubling. If you click on some of these links, this is an experiment largely conducted on Jews from across Europe. And if you look and you watch some of this, it's literally disgusting and appalling, some of the research that was done for the sake of medical research. And this was one of the many instances of why it was so critical that we had mandates and oversight on the research process. If you feel comfortable, you can click on here and on these different links and see part of this. This is just gives the framework and the foundation for why we have tightened up, and thank goodness, on why we tightened up so strategically on making sure that it's informed and equally justifiable for all, and that it is 100% voluntary if you were to participate in a research study. So we have two slides there. Both are examples of research conducted prior to the IRB process and prior to the mandates put on research. Now we're going to move on to right to life. And right to life refers to the holding of human life as a paramount value. Declaration of Independence declares life to be an innate, inalienable right and encompasses many different distinct rights. Right to be, now listen to this. I want you to think about this. When we think of right to life, we're not talking only about, we're not talking just about when you're born. We're also talking about when you die and end of life issues as well. Right to be brought to life. Right to be born. And think about these as I say these and kind of feel yourself out as far as where you stand on these. Right to have one's life maintained. At what point can someone say that's enough? And can that be infringed on you? Right not to be killed. So obviously we think murder is wrong, right? This is another way of right to life. Right to have one's life saved, regardless. Should you have the right to have life-saving, even if it's incredibly expensive, life-saving and sustaining measures put in place if you can't afford it? Or if your choices have been over and over and over, bringing you back into the emergency room, and then you're told you need to do A, B, and C, and you go back out and you don't do it, and you end up back again and again and again until eventually what your providers in the emergency room have cautioned you about actually happens. And if you can pay or not pay, should that enter into it? So right to have one's life saved and maintained. Right to be protected until natural death. So think on that. I'm going to we're going to go on to the next slide. And I want to inform you of some of these different things, but then I also want you to, when we're in class, I'll play some of these different videos and then we'll sit around and discuss. So again, I want you take the time to watch these videos and kind of get your thoughts together. I will, though, offer NCLEX style questions that are going to help you know whether you've got the gist of the content. A lot of it I want to spur you, shake you, get you a little out of your comfort zone so it forces you to think and pull out those ethical lenses and be forced to look through them. But many of these aspects are not going to be overly tested on. They're just to get you thinking. So the NCLEX style questions that I'm going to offer you are going to help guide you a little more as far as taking that funnel effect of a lot of information that's nice to know and funneling it down into the need to know information that you're going to need for the exam, for the final, and then for the NCLEX. So now we have opposing views on embryonic stem cell research, the research and use in the embryonic state. So take a few minutes and look at this video here, and then we will go on. So we have two views, right? Right to life argument, and then right to choose. We have that. So the first right to life argument opposes embryonic stem cell research. Moral status of human embryo. Human life begins at conception. So those who oppose embryonic stem cell research are those that feel that human life begins at conception. And if that's the case, they do not want that embryo or that baby to be tampered with, even when it comes to early on in the state. So depending on where you stand on that, you would have a certain perspective with this. If fetus is not human, then neither is newborn or an infant. These are the perspectives of the right to life argument that oppose stem cell research. Personhood affords certain rights. So as we mentioned with right to life in the previous slide, if you feel right to life begins at conception, then that personhood begins at conception. And that person, that human, has certain rights, is the perspective here. Conveys an absolute versus relative value on human life, and therefore this includes the embryo. intrinsic worth and equal value of every human life, regardless of age or condition. So from this perspective, the moment of conception is this, in their perspective, is the same as if you're a newborn, if you're 10, if you're 30, if you're 50, or if you're 100. It's all the same. It's all absolute human life, and that is this perspective. Okay, so then the opposite, right to life opponents, or those that support embryonic stem cell research, they view right to life is cultural construct, right to life is arbitrary, right to life is confused with duties and obligations regarding moral and decent behavior, and they also feel that no right is self-evident. Let's see, the potential for life is not the same thing as life. So a big perspective is, although that embryo is a potential life outside of the womb, this perspective would say, but it cannot at this point survive out of the womb, so potential does not equal actual life. How can we deny life to criminals if it is unearned, inalienable right? The right to life is grounded in the ability to plan and anticipate one's future. These are all perspectives of embryonic stem cell research supporters and right to life opponents. Okay, right to life opponents, again, various views on when life begins or the value of human life, utilitarian ethic, maximizing pleasure of many over the pain for a few, and maximizing the well-being of good. For if I think I can have a good result for this group, then it's okay to sacrifice one. Potential treatments and cures. Again, I've already mentioned this, but if we were to tamper with or destroy an embryo that some argue is a human life, if we do that, but it creates or it potentially creates a cure for a condition or a disease, then aren't we helping all these people? Look at what potential we have. So that's why then that would be sacrificed or compromised. So stem cell research, there are two types, adult and then embryonic. The controversy surrounds embryonic because it's the right to life. There is, however, and it's not, we don't talk about it as much, which I think is a travesty because it helps to avoid a lot of the controversy. So adult stem cells, although they are already specialized, so they are not as generalizable, we can't modify them to be what we need. They are already specialized, but we're not sacrificing potential human life. So that is the advantage of adult stem cells. Embryonic have the ability to develop into nearly 200 cells inside the human body. So an embryonic cell set, why this is so appealing is it can develop into nearly 200 different types of cells. So whatever we need and whatever we're working on, whether it's we need to use stem cells for the repair of skin out for a victim that's been in a horrific fire, and we need stem cells for the knees or the thighs or the ankles, or whatever the case may be. We can literally alter these in order to embryonic stem cells in order to be the exact that we need. Or if we're using them to create a potential cure in the research lab, you can tamper with and alter the cells into nearly 200 other cells. So the broad spectrum of an embryonic stem cell offers a lot more flexibility, whereas the adult would be very specific. Again, video here that you can watch will help to clarify. Embryonic stem cell advocates believe that material likely to be wasted. So they're saying how about we just use in the case of in vitro fertilization? They're frozen anyway. They probably would be wasted, so why don't we just use them? And remember, we might potentially find a cure. Or they might be wasted, and they also will advocate for products of abortions. Obtain good before destruction, so at least let us have a shot at them if you're going to destruct them anyway. If the sperm and egg are united outside the womb and never have been in the womb, the multiplying cells in a dish and tissue without potential to be a person. Another philosophy of why we feel that way. Again, I wanted to throw this little slide in here. Darn it, Thornton, you left the stem cells sitting out too long, and now look, they're no good. And we see all the little petri dishes with babies popping up in them. This is just another, again, it's meant to just get you thinking. Wanted to throw that slide in here again. And again, I'm going both sides of it so you can definitely see what you think. And whichever side you are on, know that there are very distinct thoughts and feelings on the other side. And you may find yourself caring for people that have very, very contradicting ethical principles than you are. And as a nurse, you still must carry out the wishes of that patient for not only for them, but for their family. And you will do that in a respectful manner, I hope. Embryonic stem cells, again, characterized by unspecialized, again, we mentioned. If it's an adult and it already has chosen its path, it'll already be specific to one type of cell. But in embryonic stem cells, again, it's unspecialized. Can renew their cells for long periods of time so they can continue to renew themselves, can be induced to become any type of specialized cell. And again, if you can look on there, you can see such as cardiac muscles, blood cells, neural cells, whatever the need is, you can alter that embryonic cell to be that. So that is, again, the reason, and that's in a pluripotent stem cell. Pluripotent stem cell is what we're talking about. And the totipotent is it's the cell and can form from embryo to placenta. That's in the very, very, very initial stage. That's a totipotent. Then it rolls into pluripotent, and that's where we can take it and then bring it into, do we want a cardiac cell? Do we want a neuro cell? Do we want a blood cell? Up to 200 cells. So human embryos are the source, or somatic stem cells can come from placenta, from cord blood, cells from an adult. These are all somatic stem cells that aren't coming directly from a human embryo. So again, somatic stem cells can come from the adult cells that we've mentioned, the placenta, or the cord blood. I have a slide here that you can see embryonic stem cells, again, as I mentioned, a pluripotent, and can be broken down into, divided out into, altered into whichever chart, the neuro, the cardiac, the muscle, blood cells. And then adult is referred to as multipotent stem cells. But again, if you're taking it from the blood, it's already a blood stem cell. If you are removing it from the neuro cells, the cardiac cells, whichever, it already is that cell. So it must be used for that purpose. So if you're taking it from the skin, it's already a skin cell, so it needs to be used as a skin cell somewhere else on the body. So when you're thinking, like in a skin graft, if something, you're taking certain cells and then moving them to regenerate, but it's already specific. You can't take a skin cell and then try to put it into the blood and then transfer it into a blood cell. So again, locations of somatic stem cells in the body. You can take cells from nearly any part of the body. So almost 200 locations. So you can see skin, heart, liver, bone marrow, skeletal muscle, blood vessels, from the brain, all sorts. So again, the summary of the three types of cells that I mentioned. Totipotent cells can come from a cell types in the body, plus the extra embryonic or placental cells, embryonic cells within the first couple of cell divisions after fertilization are the cells that are totipotent. So that's the part I want you to remember. The bold on this slide, embryonic cells within the first couple of cell divisions after fertilization are totipotent. Pluripotent cells can give rise to all of the cell types that make up the body. All of the cell types can come from pluripotent. Embryonic stem cells are considered pluripotent. So embryonic stem cells are pluripotent, and they can give rise to any and all of the stem cells within the body. Pluripotent embryonic stem cells. Multipotent cells can divide into more than one cell type, but are more limited than pluripotent cells. Adult stem cells, like cord blood stem cells, are considered multipotent. Multipotent stem cells, again, are blood stem cells, adult stem cells, and they're considered multipotent. So you can look at this, the iPS cells. This is a discovery from 2006, and it pretty much revolutionized the world of stem cell research. Watch that video. It's very, very informative, because we're trying to get away from the ethical dilemma and the controversy surrounding stem cell research. And again, the buzzword and the controversy surrounds embryonic stem cell research. Basic stem cell research is not typically controversial, because there's not the risk of compromising human life. Okay, legal stance. No forms of stem cell research are prohibited by federal law, only restricted on funding. That's important to know. And again, you can follow, I've got a couple on here, how it started with Bush, then we went to Obama, then we, as we're going through, then now it went to Trump, now we're going to Biden, and you can see depending on who's in office, as I mentioned in the very beginning, are going to be how these certain aspects are limited, or how they're funded, how they're promoted. So when you're thinking, just the legal stance definitely affects the ethical dilemmas that we might find ourselves in, based upon what is given the green light and what is not. You won't be having faced with exam questions on that. I just want you to be aware of that. So Dr. James Thompson says, if human embryonic stem cell research does not make you at least a little bit uncomfortable, then you haven't thought about it enough, because it should get you a little bit into the mode of you're uncomfortable because you can't wrap your brain around exactly what is the right and wrong answer. And I know for myself what I feel very strongly about to be the right and wrong answer, but once I'm thrown into a professional role where there might be a rub or a contradiction of my personal beliefs based off of what I'm required to do in a professional role, that's why you want to give this a deep dive and kind of filter through this. It doesn't have to be a strenuous mental exercise at this point. I know stress is high as nursing students, but I just want you to be aware and cognitive as we go through the program, and you're in different clinical environments and different units, and you'll see certain things made me uncomfortable, and I didn't feel at peace with what I was doing, and I was watching things transpire that I didn't know that I actually supported, or I had to explore my thoughts and feelings on that. That's going to give you time to do that in nursing school. So then in hopes, when you graduate and you find a professional role, you'll be in something that aligns well with your virtue ethics, and it's not going to put you in a constant rub with your conflict, ethical dilemma state. But do know there are always going to be situations where we're faced with an ethical dilemma. There are always going to be times that you're not going to agree with everyone you work with 100%. You're not going to agree 100% with each patient that you have. And you may feel very strongly one way about immunizations, and then you may take care of a family that feels very, very different. And you're going to have a mutual respect for that family and provide the best possible care you can for that family. And you're going to support their beliefs. You're going to offer education, absolutely. You're going to offer support and can I give you some resources for this? And you're going to give them as much information as you can. But in the end, it's going to be their decision for how they think and feel regarding immunization. So whichever ethical dilemma is before you, certain things will bother me that may not bother you. Certain things will bother you when you're a new grad that may change once you are older, or once you have a family of your own, or once you have children. Just different situations. We know that we always need to be cognitive and be aware, and just know the ethical dilemmas will arise. We need to know there are ethical committees within most institutions that you're going to work, that you can get support if you find yourself in a case and not knowing what steps to take. There will be that support for you there as well. Knowing there's a team approach, and yet you can always ask for help and run your thoughts and feelings by someone. And then knowing the deontological perspective, and what was that again? Rules and norms, policies and procedures, the utilitarianism. I want you to try to find examples of these when you're going throughout the program as well, and think back to, oh, okay, that was utilitarianism. If I'm justifying what I'm doing now for the greater good. This is also, as we go up, I'm going to give you some, as I'll give probably in the subsequent semester, we'll talk about a lifeboat example of if there was a lifeboat and a ship is sinking and there were very limited seats on and only 20 could get on. Who would get on? Would it be the children? Would it be the women and the children? Would it be the older population that should have a spot on the boat? Would it be the youngest? And when you think through, you can kind of come up with an argument for why each group should be able to be on the lifeboat. But if you can only put 20 on, which would it be? And putting you in some situations where you have to kind of think through and formulate an opinion, and then kind of justify why you feel that way or why you would have that perspective, is just a healthy exercise to go through. It helps us to kind of purge our thoughts and feelings, and just to kind of wake up our perspectives and be aware of that as we go in our professional role as a nurse. But again, I'm Dr. Ang. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me. I love to talk ethics. Love to talk anything legal or ethics. So if you wanted to discuss a little bit more, I will try to come up. Actually, I do have, now remember I've already put that on there. I do have a little study guide that you can go through. There are certain frameworks on there, ethical principles. Go through that. That's going to guide you as far as what you need to know for the exam. But if you have any situations maybe where you work, or things that you've encountered even personally, ethically, and you want to kind of take a deep dive into that, I would love to discuss it with you if you deem that would be beneficial to you. So please reach out if I can do anything. Also, have a super week, and remember, I'm always here for you if you need anything at all. Take care.